And joining me now, 2020 presidential candidate Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, who's today released his $3 trillion plan on climate change and environmental justice. The Prime Minister of the Bahamas there talking about the devastation in that set of islands. This comes actually, years after Hurricane Maria, but it does feel like a matter of time. Just a question of when, of how many climate disasters we're going to see increasingly here on the mainland of the United States.
Tragic fires, and the increase of those fires, the flooding in the Midwest, these horrific storms. This is something that is coming at us. It's really barreling towards civilization, and we must act with a much graver sense of urgency, or else the cost of inaction now, as measuring for our economy in trillions of dollars, they're predicting by 2100 it could shrink the U.S. economy by more than 10% if we do not act.
By 10%. What is your understanding of? I mean, the fundamental problem here, and I want to talk about your proposal, is that it's an issue where there's one political coalition having a debate about it and one political coalition not. Right? Like, it is just a one-sided conversation right now.
I mean, in terms of the human species, it's bigger than that. There's only one major political party on the planet Earth that is denying that this is a problem with the sense of urgency. I mean, that's how singular what a small handful of Republicans, because let's not paint each other with broad brushes. Republicans polling them,
that's true. That's true.
What this
rank and file folks and
just
everybody
kind of understands it. And by the way, open your window. Most Americans are seeing wacky weather, the hottest months ever recorded in the last months that we've had. So this is no longer up for debate in most Americans' hearts and minds, except for a narrow group of leadership that is doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industries and other massive corporate lobbyists who are trying to stop us doing action. And meanwhile, the consensus of global scientists are saying if we do not act with a sense of urgency in about an 11-year window, the catastrophic effects on humanity. In fact, read the military reports. Those are things that are scary to me. When our own U.S. military is saying we better plan for planetary crisis, migratory problems, extremism, famines, the kind of things that if we do not act, that we will see on the planet Earth.
So if this is urgent, before we get to the details, to me, there's two questions about a climate plan. What's in the climate plan, and how high is it on a list of priorities? So my question to you is that if you are elected President of the United States and you have unified democratic governance, let's say,
right,
is climate the first thing you move on? Is that the first domestic legislation?
So this is the thing about my plan that I'm excited about, is what I did when I was mayor. When we had another Republican president who then refused to join the Kyoto Accords, I turned to my city and I said, okay, climate will be the lens through which we view everything that we do. So I was a guy that said, hey, our prisoner reentry programs are going to be putting people to work on urban farms, because in our city we need to pull more of that carbon out of the air. We said that our job training programs are going to be about environmentally retrofitting buildings, union jobs. So as president, it's the same thing. There's nothing we can do anymore that's not viewed through that lens, and that's changing the practices of how we procure things. It's where we invest. It's our R&D. It's our ag bills.
Right.
Everything has to now be about meeting this crisis, because if not, by the time my second term is over, our planet will be slipping into a crisis.
And you're specific in the plan, like Elizabeth Warren also did this, and a few others have broken out, right, where you can take executive action, right, as president, and where there's legislative need. But when we're talking about the amount of money you're talking about here, and we're talking about a kind of fee and dividend system, right, on some of the biggest polluters, right? You put a fee on carbon, the dividend is given back to households. That needs legislation. So, like, the question again is that the first thing you legislate on? Yeah,
because it's tied to a lot of other things. Look, there's many Americans calling out for a massive infrastructure program. This is in line with what infrastructure looks like. I'm a environmental justice guy, as a guy that lives in a city that has a massive lead problem right now. Well, most people don't know this. There are 3,000 communities, 3,000 jurisdictions that have where the children have more than twice the blood lead level of Flint, Michigan. We should get rid of all the lead pipes that are going into residential areas, schools. This should be something that should have been done decades ago, frankly, but we haven't done it. So much of what I'm doing relates to other aspects, whether it's R&D, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's jobs, boosting the economy. Our plan would create millions of jobs in this country.
So you see that as a priority, like a package together?
I see a package together that it will touch on a lot of other priorities. Again, climate has to be the lens through which everything that we do.
I want to ask you about another issue, which is obviously front of mind right now after the shooting in West Texas, a horrible massacre there. There's really interesting polling on gun control right now, gun safety measures, that is showing higher levels of support than there have been for a while. And one thing jumped out at me was this from Quinnipiac poll. Do you support requiring a license to purchase a gun? 82%, which it's a very polarized country. You don't get a lot of 82% in polling. That is part of your campaign platform. What do you think of that number?
Well, first of all, remember when we came out on this, a number of people in the Democratic field took pot shots at me calling for licensing. It is something that works. This is evidence-based. Connecticut did it. They saw their shootings drop 40%, suicides drop 15%. It is common sense. Someone who needs a license to drive a car, shouldn't you need a license to own and to buy and possess a firearm?
You think it's constitutional?
Absolutely. And again, even
with the court's post-Heller jurisprudence, you think so?
I absolutely think so. Look, we have restrictions on our First Amendment rights.
Right.
Common sense restrictions like this. Law-abiding citizens have nothing to worry about in purchasing a gun. This will dramatically stop the ability for people who want to do horrendous things to get weapons.
82% polling. I don't know how many votes there'd be in the U.S. Senate if you called this for a vote tomorrow. 30, maybe? I mean, there's a gap right now between what the public is telling pollsters and what the institutions of our various political leadership views as the frontier of the possible.
So as the one guy in the Senate that lives in a neighborhood where people get shot, that had Shahad Smith last year get killed with an assault rifle on the top of my block. The reason why I came out so early with a bold plan that included things like licensing was to put my own party on notice. That you should not have to wait until a mass shooting comes to your state, your community, your neighborhood to feel this sense of urgency. I wanted to move the national conversation. And so when you say only getting 30-something votes, I'm telling you right now that our party needs to get on board with bold vision on what's going to protect our country, because governments are formed for the common defense. We have lost more people in the last 50 years to gun violence in our country than in every single war in America combined. The carnage is going up. We see the terrorist attacks that we are now having, the majority of them since 9/11 have been right-wing extremist groups, the majority of those white supremacist groups. We have to understand that we are in a dangerous, perilous time, and if our party is not leading with a vision to protect our country, then what the hell are we, why are we forming? And again, as a guy who's coming from a community, remember, the majority of people murdered in our country are black men. And this, to me, is not something there should be moral clarity on this, and that's why I came out with the kind of bold plan that I have.
All right, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, nice to have you here in the studio. Come back soon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.